So we're going to look at why good teams unravel and what the real cost of that. We're going to look at some habits that might help you identify and close those gaps in team performance. Then we're going to look at some of the traits of a strong team player. So we'll look at what makes a great team work together, but then we'll look on an individual level at what people need to demonstrate or what traits they might need to have to be a really good team player. And then hopefully we'll give you a simple action that you can test back in your teams once you get back off this call. So why does teamwork matter? It's really interesting. I've worked as a consultant for the last probably 7 or 8 years, and I do genuinely believe statement two on that little bullet pointed slide there. Teamwork is the ultimate competitive advantage. It's still really, in my view, the one big edge that organisations don't fully take advantage and make the most of. In reality, I've met probably 50, 60 organisations over the last 5 to 6 years. And they'll all have various different focuses, and that focus might be the quality of the product they have. It might be the quality of the service they provide. It might be the technical qualities of the individuals that they hire. So there might be a particularly technical organisation or focused on a very complicated product. And so their focus has been on hiring intellectually brilliant people. Very rarely do people focus on teamwork. And yet actually, no matter how brilliant individuals are, and no matter how brilliant you think your product could become, without great teamwork, it just won't come to life. And so that is why I think teamwork is so important. And I've seen some great examples of teamwork over the years, but unfortunately I've seen a lot more examples where things could have been so much better and the material impact on performance was there for all to see. That Gallup survey that it references there, 21% uplift in profit with engaged teams. And the reality is that those gaps in team performance, those problems between individuals or between the group, they drain time, they drain trust, and ultimately they drain money. And so hopefully, if I get nothing across other than this today, that whatever you do, go back and invest into teamwork, because it's singularly probably the one behavior or the one thing within an organization that I think that really gets taken for granted and assumed rather than genuinely worked on. I'm going to share with you a quick story to bring that to life, I think, just to really highlight, I guess, where this can go wrong and what can be done when work is kind of put together on teamwork. And I wrapped my brains as to what was the best story I could share. But I worked with a food retail business probably 5, 6 years ago. An owner and an MD were working together. They'd been together for about 6 months and the business was struggling. What became uncovered from that conversation when I spoke to them both individually was that the financial results of the organization weren't great, but that actually the teamwork level, they were struggling with each other and they were struggling with the team. And the owner particularly confessed that he was avoiding a very difficult conversation. In fact, he went further than that and said, Craig, I'll invest in a 2 or 3 day workshop to see if we can move things forward. But if things don't move forward pretty dramatically, then that MD is going to be leaving, because I can't work with him at the moment. There's such a big gap between us and a gap in terms of our understanding of the current situation. And so we ran a 2-day, possibly a 3-day workshop as a few years ago now, just really focusing in on how to develop and build teamwork and trust across that organization. There's a particular process that we follow and use for that. But the main thing we talked about, and we'll talk about it further on in the slides, was around trust. And what we really helped them understand was how behaviorally different they were and how that how that was preventing them from understanding each other's perspectives initially, and how actually if they learn to appreciate those more effectively, what that might actually do to the performance of the organization and their ability to work together. The real objective of the owner at that stage actually was to semi-retire, and that we managed to deliver within 6 months. He did semi-retire from the business, and the MD stayed then for a further 2 years before eventually semi-retiring himself. So I guess it just demonstrates that no matter how broken you think a relationship is, if you're clear on what things you need to fix in order for that team to work more effectively, then it can be done. It just takes a bit of hard work and some clarity around what really matters. So I thought I'd just share that story with you because it just helps bring it to life. Genuine story, local business, really struggling, and some hard work on their side and a little bit of an intervention from us resulted in things really smoothing out and actually put them on a better path. Unfortunately, COVID then caused them some serious issues a couple of years later, as it did for most businesses. But in reality, at that point, we did move things forward for them. I think it's really interesting. We talk about the hidden costs of ineffective teamwork. Um, Teamwork, as I've said earlier on, quite often gets ignored and just assumed that everything's okay. There's a few stats here that are quite interesting. The State of Teams report is written by Wiley, which is an education provider in the workplace, and they estimate that 7 hours a week is wasted fixing poor teamwork. I think that the next kind of stat really sums it up. 40% of working time is lost through poor collaboration, and 86% blame poor collaboration for workplace failure. I think if you all reflect on being involved in a team or a project, how many times does the word communication come up as the key reason why that particular project didn't go to plan or didn't deliver the results that were expected? 37% say a bad team is the top reason they'll quit. So 10 people in your organization that leave, 4 of them are leaving because they're not enjoying and they're not being rewarded and getting out from the team environment what they would have liked to have seen. And then the overall effects of poor culture in UK businesses is estimated by the CIPD to be £23 billion, which is not an insignificant amount of money. So there's just some stats that really hopefully bring to life why investing and working on teamwork in your organization could have real benefit. I think this slide really kind of sums up where good teams get it wrong. To be clear, most of my presentation today is going to be focused on actually teams with the right intent and generally positive attitudes towards teamwork. That's not always the case when I go to meet organizations. Sometimes there's somebody that's really causing some serious problems and that needs to be addressed with a slightly larger intervention. But generally people are at least trying to work together. And so what you tend to see is polite nods instead of really digging into the unspoken problems and tensions within that group. You might identify things like conflict being dodged rather than people within a team really embracing healthy challenge and really facing into conflict. And you certainly won't see what I call peer checking, which is where the team holds each other accountable rather than all of the drain of those difficult conversations sitting purely with the manager. And so invariably it ends up sitting with the manager. And if the manager's struggling with conflict, then quite often those conversations just don't surface and just don't happen. And so they're just some examples of where good teams can slip up. And we'll talk more about that as we carry on through the presentation. Why it keeps happening is I guess is a really simple answer to that. And that is that most organizations hire pretty good people that are willing and want to be able to work together, but they don't identify the processes or the ways of working that make their team really successful or the habits that make them work together effectively. And so what they don't then do is build the daily processes of just checking in with each other to make sure those behaviors are kept alive. Away days can really help with stuff like this. So some of the interventions that we do and other organizations can do can really help you align and build a stronger foundation for your team, but they won't work in isolation. They might give you a framework to be more successful, but if you don't then bring that to life once you get back to the office through some practical checks Monday to Friday, in reality, all of the work from the workshop will be lost very, very quickly. And so it's important that that's the real reason why it keeps happening, that you can invest heavily in a 1, 2 or 3 day intervention for your team, but if you don't build some processes in to ensure that your team is consistently thinking about teamwork, then the chances are that what you paid for will be largely lost. There's quite a few models out there that can help you identify how a team's working. Some of you might be familiar with this particular model, the Tuckman model. So let's just run through it quickly. You've got the curve there. Bottom right is where essentially where businesses or teams start, where they're forming, and they're building the basics. And you'll notice that one of the words that's in that particular segment is trust. So they're just basically building a basic foundation of trust before they can then move to that storming aspect. And that's about creating a challenging environment where there's honest and straightforward debate, and that the problems within the team are talked about and discussed openly, before then moving into more norming, which is about agreeing how we work together day to day, and then into that really high performance area where trust and challenge results in a clear delivery of expectations or results for an organization. I've gone through quite a bit of information already there around teamwork. It might be quite interesting to hear from you on the call. Just drop into the chat for me, just read that slide through and have a bit of a reflection on where you think your current team is and where it might sit in that model. I'll wait for some answers to come through. Yeah, great. So Susan's right at the start of that journey at forming. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, Kate is in the same place. Yeah, Greg's in storming. Good. New team. You're all quite grounded. This is really positive, because it's not uncommon for me to share this with people and we're performing back, or we're in that norming stage, when in reality, when you push back and ask some questions about the very basics of whether they have trust or whether they can really openly conflict and debate with each other, it very quickly unravels all the way back to either a storming status or a forming status. Yeah, so most of you are in that kind of space. Yeah, Hannah there thought we'd reached norming, but it looks like we're back to forming again. Yeah, so you can see there's a variety of results there, but in general, people are on that right-hand side of the model, which probably reflects and explains why most of you are on the call today looking at teamwork, which is good. There's another one as well, which this is not quite as famous as that particular one, the GRPI model. Again, it's just a foundational model to help you really identify and work through what makes a team work. So you've got that very basic level of interpersonal relationships. And you'll notice again that this particular pyramid starts with trust. And that's going to be a common theme as we work through the presentation. You can't really move forward in a team if you don't have that. It then moves into processes. So do we trust each other? Can we work together? What processes do we need to have in order to work more effectively? What roles do we need to then perform in order for that to work? And what goals are we going to set? And so those two frameworks are really quite useful snapshots that you could share with your team to get a sense of how things are going and where you are on those and what actions you might want to take to move yourselves forward. But unfortunately, I think they leave a bit of a gap, because what they do is they really show the cracks in your organization, but they don't really close those cracks. In essence, they're just guides, but they don't give you a real sense of what you need to do in a practical sense to move those things forward. And so put on that last point there, gaps don't fix themselves, actions does. I've lost count of the times I've met a leader or a team manager where they've identified there's a gap, particularly between two individuals in a team, and their reaction has been to leave it and hope that it'll solve itself. And invariably it doesn't. Invariably it leads to the situation escalating, and it probably leads to an exit of some description, whether that be a forced one or a voluntary one. Eventually somebody is removed from the situation because things aren't working. Don't let things fester in a team. It's the worst tactic you can take to those problems. You have to address them, no matter how uncomfortable that can be, if you want to retain that talent that you've invested a lot of money obtaining in the first place. So what I thought I'd try and do today was to bring together some habits that you could use on a practical level after the call with your team, to try and start to drive team performance forward. And given where you've all said you are on that model we talked about earlier, it feels like this might be quite useful. So let's talk these through one by one. if you really want a team to flourish, you can't really move forward until you have safety or trust. You need to create an environment where people feel comfortable to admit they've made a mistake, admit they need help, share an idea, no matter how wacky it might seem, and not be fearful of the consequences or ridicule. The list goes on, but fundamentally creating a safe environment where you trust each other is the foundational pillar of any team building process or exercise that you'll find out on the internet or ChatGPT or wherever else you choose to look. You have to build that foundational level of safety. Once you've got that safety, you can do the next thing, which is to challenge. And that's about creating unfiltered debate inside your organization where people trust each other's sentiments and don't question what people's agendas might be, and are prepared to dive into difficult conversations and difficult debates and have what I call healthy rows. There's nothing wrong with a row in an organization as long as everybody's intent in the room is to get to the best possible result, either for the team or for the organization. Where rows become unproductive is where we don't trust each other's agendas and don't really know what the other person's trying to achieve here, or when we're not focused on the end goals of the organization and we've become maybe siloed in our mentality and our argument is focused on trying to win or trying to score points for our team, the team that maybe works for us. If you can get that, that's a really powerful thing to do. I'm a huge advocate of strong levels of debate in an organization. I see quite a lot of what I would refer to as artificial harmony in organizations, particularly at senior leadership level, where they don't argue outrageously about their problems, shout and scream at each other, which is what people think about when we talk about conflict. Invariably, what we actually see is artificial harmony, where everybody pretends everything's okay when really it isn't. If you can't challenge and you can't get stuck into those debates, you probably will struggle with aspect 3, which is about clarity. So that's just about ensuring that you've got clear decisions made and that those decisions stick. And there'll be a couple of reasons those decisions won't stick if you haven't clocked that already. The first one will be, well, I didn't enter into the debate, so why should I actually deliver on the agreed action, because I didn't agree with it. And that happens an awful lot. And the second one is maybe we weren't clear enough in terms of our presentation of that action for people to know exactly what they needed to do after the conversation had finished. The first one of those two is the bigger problem in my experience. If people don't enter into the debate, they won't buy into the solution and they will half-ass it, maybe not do it at all, just not go at it with the right level of vigor for it to really be successful and for the business to achieve the objectives or the calls that they've decided upon. The fourth one I talked about earlier, which was about peer check. I think this is really powerful. There's nothing more powerful than a peer calling you out for failing to deliver on an action, or actually celebrating a success that you've had within your team. And I think it's far more powerful than the boss doing it. It takes an awful lot of weight off the boss's shoulders, and it creates group accountability where you're holding each other accountable and gives a real drive towards the overall goals of that team. It makes it feel like everybody's in that together rather than the manager is dragging things along. And so driving peer accountability where you can it can be a really powerful action. Just don't forget, you need to get those first 3 foundations in place before you can move to that stage. And then the final one is around one team. I do a lot of work with senior leadership teams around similar topics and subjects to this. It's amazing how many people paid huge salaries think that their primary focus is the team that works for them, not the team they're in. And that can be quite a difficult message to get across. Your primary focus needs to be the team that you work for. If you're in a senior leadership team, it should be about the CEO or the MD that you work for. You always look up in terms of your team, not look down. Your priorities and your focus should be to the wider goals of the organization and not always to the team that you work within or the team that works for you. That doesn't mean you need to not create the right environment with them, but it's really important that your ego doesn't get in the way and that you allow yourself to become really embedded in embracing the decisions and actions that that senior team is delivering. And if you want some examples of that, you'll have probably worked with leaders over the years who've been to senior leadership team meetings and come away and said, oh, we've agreed 3 things today. And then you've gone, well, I'm not sure about action 3. And the response you get is, oh yeah, but I didn't really want to do that one, but I didn't say anything on the day. And what you're really saying to your team is, well, I didn't really agree to that. And so you don't really have to do that. And that's where you get that real breakdown across the organization. So hopefully those 5 habits make sense. They will help you build a really strong foundation to really work on and develop teamwork in your organization. The data tells quite an interesting story in terms of whether these particular attributes or these habits are really brought to life in UK business. And most of these stats came from Gallup and HBR. So safe to speak, 79% won't admit mistakes because they're fearful of the reaction. 66% avoid challenging ideas or giving feedback. Just over half leave meetings unclear on what's agreed, and a third say that their peers don't hold each other accountable. My experience is it's possibly a bit higher than that. I was quite surprised by that stat, but even so, only a third say that peers do that. And then finally, 42% left a role because people focused on their own patch and not their team result. So if you've got a problem with retention in your business, for 10 people that leave, four will leave, probably statistically due to bad teamwork, which is quite a powerful stat and really helps you understand the opportunity that fixing teamwork presents, both in terms of improved results, but also improved retention. Again, just so I don't dive ahead and just to get a bit of interaction from you guys, it'd be good to hear where you think the biggest challenge for you right now is in your organization across those 5 behaviors. So safe to speak, healthy challenge, all the way through to one team result. Which one really resonates with you as the biggest opportunity where you are at the moment? Thanks, Greg. Yeah, all of the above. Healthy challenge. Yeah. Thank you, Bobby. Oh, Steph's popped a hand up. You okay, Steph?
Yeah, I would say safe to speak, but not because behaviors are aggressive or anything like that, but it's this sense of toxic positivity sometimes that I've seen in teams where, you know, you have to be seen to believe that anything's possible, and of course we can hit the numbers, and almost this sense of, you know, how do you create the conditions for people to challenge that and be safe to speak up and not be seen as a negative Nelly by having a slightly different point of view? That's always an interesting one because it's not obviously, it's not an obvious disruptive trait, but toxic positivity, I think, also has an impact on the teams.
Yeah, it's a really lovely phrase, and I think it's probably more prevalent than you realized. I think it's a really big challenge. Depending on the personality types and the makeup of a team, there can be a tendency to really avoid conflict, and the way to do that is to be overly positive, because it's like, let's just airbrush over this and pretend everything's okay. And you're right, creating that. Yeah, Susan's put that. I love that. I'm gonna frame that toxic positivity. Greg, I'm gonna pick on you as well, because you said you feel like you've got all 5 of them to work on. Does any one of them stick out in particular, or is there a reason why, on reflection, all 5 are a big priority for you?
Yeah, and I think they're all kind of linked, you know, because there's this general fear to share bad news. There's lots of politics, personal politics, business politics going on, and it's like there are certain things that start to actually become part of the next problem, you know, because it feels like certain people are lying to themselves and actually lying to the organization, you know, and I use that word lying deliberately, because you can flower it up and talk about mismanaging expectations. They are fundamentally hiding the truth, and that is therefore lying.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that actually if you can put the fish on the table and deal with it like adults, it would unlock so many of these things. Yeah, because the thing is, obviously, when you're lying, you can't be clear, because what is it that you're actually shooting for? There's clearly no challenge, because actually they've given a message to the boss that actually you can't challenge. And if you've got a hierarchical organization, well, good luck. It's whatever the marching orders are, that you got to stick with that, whatever you say.
Yeah.
So you see what I mean? And so actually it becomes an absolute vicious circle where all of these factors are affected.
It's really
Does that make sense?
interesting. Yeah, it does. It's really, and what you're really describing probably validates why we spend so much time working with senior leadership teams, because what you're really saying is there's a problem right at the top and it's just cascading all the way through that organization.
100%.
And leading to problems at all kinds of different levels that probably the owner or founder of that organization doesn't understand, that the fact that his team's not working as effectively as it could is no understanding of the impact that that's having much further down the organization at far different levels. So I think that's a really valid point. And then Hannah, I'm just going to mention Hannah's comment in the box. Yeah, biggest issue at the minute is one team member is it's all about their own ego and not the team. It is a really big problem that it does surface a lot, and it is a much more complicated issue to deal with, and sometimes requires a bit of external intervention to solve problems like that. So yeah, I feel your pain. It's a difficult one to solve, that one. Okay. I'm going to do naming quiz for a couple of people in the next couple of slides. Hopefully somebody, let's see if anybody recognizes this chap. He's the leader and founder of a global fintech that's really focused on building trust and accountability across the organization. He's not that famous, so I'm going to tell you who he is, because the reality is it's not that easy to spot, but you will recognize the organization he owns. So he's got a policy of don't tolerate brilliant jerks, and this is Reid Hoffman, and he is the CEO and founder of Netflix. I actually really love this phrase. It's a bit American and it's a bit harsh, as Americans sometimes can be, but I think it's really relevant because in his space, they've really achieved unbelievable things. When you think about Netflix, they've gone from delivering DVDs through your front door every weekend when you wanted to watch a new film, to the absolute behemoth of a company that they've become today. And there's probably not many people on the call that don't have a Netflix account, which probably tells you an awful lot about the success of the way that he's run that organization. And the reason do not tolerate brilliant jerks is really relevant for Netflix is because of the space they work in. The reality is that it's a technical company focused on technology, and so intellect really matters in their organization. And so there can be a tendency to focus on that intellect and not worry too much about the behavior that comes alongside it. In other words, hiring a brilliant jerk. And as Reid Hoffman has put across in a number of TED Talks and other things you can pick off on YouTube, this is a really strong policy they stick to, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like at Netflix in this slide. They really focus on trust and freedom, and the freedom only works because the trust is real. And so the commitment to not tolerating brilliant jerks is a real commitment to developing and building that trust. They encourage teams to debate and openly admit mistakes, and they push each other at peer level, not at management level, to really solve their problems. The last bit's a really interesting one. It's probably going to get more complicated to deliver, I suspect, when the new labour laws come out. But in essence, if you're the wrong fit, they move quite quickly on that to try and retain the trust that they've built across the organisation. They do it in the right way. He speaks very positively, but he's pretty open. If you don't fit the organisation and they can identify that quite early on, they'll give you a little paycheck and send you on your way. They don't want to deal with that in the organisation because they understand the impact that will have on their ability to deliver teamwork brilliantly. And I think that's a really interesting, quite a brave sentiment that's actually really paid off for him. They've gone from a very small business who tried to sell themselves to blockbusters because they were going out of business and hadn't got any money, and that's a really well-known story, to being worth, well, at the minute, if you're into the stock market, you'll know they're worth $500 billion. So they've done pretty well over the last 20 or 30 years. And obviously the culture, he believes, is a big part of why they've become so successful. I'm going to share a little video now. I think that's my next slide that also articulates the same issue, I think, or the same opportunity, but in a slightly different way. TikTok's definitely useful for something. Little video clips is probably a good example. So that's Simon Sinek, for those of you that don't know, just a brilliant example of why trust is so important. And I can relate that. I was in the armed forces for 5 or 6 years. I went to Sandhurst and did army officer training with a chap called Duncan. I won't share his surname because he's actually still in the army and he's at quite a senior level now. But he was a brilliant example. He's a fantastic soldier. He just an unbelievable physically, an absolute specimen. You know, he could have walked through a wall on his own. He was just incredible. Nobody wanted to work with him. Nobody wanted him on their team. When we went on exercise and the chips were down and we were all being measured to decide whether we graduated as army officers or not, nobody wanted Duncan. Why? Because it was all about Duncan. It was all about Duncan's ego. He just wanted to be number one, and he didn't see or really care that what it meant if he trod on somebody during an exercise to become, you know, the best on the course. He didn't understand that might result in somebody else failing. He just wanted to be number one, and I think that's just a perfect example of what Simon Sinek was talking about there. So quick summary then, this is a really easy way to spot some differences of whether you've got some challenges in your team or whether things are working really well. I'm not going to go through these points individually, but on a weak team, as an example, you will hide slip-ups, whereas in a strong team, you'll definitely own those slip-ups and you'll feel safe to speak. And the healthy challenge one is really relevant. A lot of you put that in the storming space on the model we talked about earlier. Weak teams or teams with problems will avoid those healthy debates, and stronger teams will really dive into those healthy challenge and tackle ideas and problems honestly. Okay, let's do a quick habit check. So on the screen there, I've got 5 different habits: safe to speak, healthy challenge, clarity, hold each other to it, and one team result. I just want you to tell me which one of those habits resonates for you as an opportunity with your team. Again, it's probably similar to what we shared earlier, but just drop quickly into the chat for me. Which one of those do you see as the biggest opportunity for you right now if you were going to focus on one of them? Yeah, good. Okay, so a variety of answers coming through: safe to speak, one team result, healthy challenge, clarity. So you can see you're all at different stages and different spaces, and that's fine. That's what working on a team's all about, identifying where those gaps are. This is a chap called Patrick Lencioni. We do quite a lot of work around some of the stuff that he does, and this is a really useful phrase that he's got. If you could get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry in any market again at any time. And I think that's really, really valuable. I talked about that earlier, but I can't really re-emphasize that point enough. If you've got teams working brilliantly together, it will dramatically improve your performance. I was going to do another name the person quiz, but I suspect that Greg will probably know who this is. So I thought I'd share some insights into what an ideal team player looks like. This is a model that Patrick does actually use. And he talks about these 3 particular behaviors that you can identify in individuals that make them great team players. They're humble. They put the team first. They'll share the credit, and they've got an ego. They're hungry. They'll take responsibility, and they'll step up, and they're people smart. They'll read the room and know what the response is. And the reason I've shared that picture is that's Geraint Thomas. He is a professional cyclist, and he's largely fulfilled a role as what's called a domestique. And for those of you that aren't into cycling, it basically means he does anything and everything within his own power to ensure that the team leader wins the stage or wins the Tour. And if that means sitting in front of that leader for 5-6 hours in a saddle doing 160 miles to make sure that they don't feel the wind resistance and make it 10% easier so that they've got some energy left at the end of the day, that's what he does. And he does it day in, day out, and did it for 6 or 7 years to enormous effect. He allowed Chris Froome and Bradley Wiggins to win the Tour de France multiple times. And whilst they might be the names that everybody remembers, the reality is that neither of them wins without Geraint Thomas. That is the version. It's a great version of an ideal team player. So how to start small. Pick one habit to focus on. This is kind of practical advice now. Don't tackle all five at once. And then just agree a check-in question. How do you keep this alive within your group or within your team? Share some examples each week of how it's working or slipping away if it's not working. And maybe pair it with a bigger plan if you've got larger problems that you feel a small intervention to kick things off with might help. I can't re-emphasize enough, a large intervention won't work without the day-to-day activities, but it can be a way of accelerating progress if you really want to move fast or if you feel you've got really larger problems that you want to address. We're going to share with you a Team Habits tool, which is just a simple one-page guide that we'll send out post the workshop today, post the seminar today, just giving you a way to track that progress through. And hopefully you'll find that a useful addition that you can work through with your team. It's full of practical tips. It's just a one-pager, nice and easy to complete. And it works because it keeps small visible habits and makes trust practical. And it's not just a value on the wall. We're really trying to build some action within your team or within your organization. It'll work on any team, big or small. And it will turn big away day ideas into practical steps that you can take from Monday through to Friday. Cost of doing nothing is probably more than you realize in reality. I've spent a lot of time on this subject over the last 5 years. The reality, as I said earlier, is that small gaps don't fix themselves. They will grow and they will lead to exits. And I've seen that, unfortunately, on far too many occasions. You'll end up wasting time because you'll end up repeating work or end up going to multiple meetings talking about the same subjects because you didn't really disagree violently on the day and don't really commit to the actions or weren't clear on the actions, and either way they didn't get done. Talent will get wasted. I'm not sure which is worst. Either somebody becomes disillusioned and sticks around and becomes quite toxic, or worse, they leave. But either way, it can grow and fester into something much more serious. And the culture slips and the costs of that to rebuild it later are far greater than a small intervention at the start. And Reid Hoffman's advice around don't tolerate people that don't really contribute positively really rings true in that particular case. Final thoughts from me, what you can do next. It may have really resonated with you today, and you may have decided actually you wouldn't mind talking about teamwork on a more deeper level in relation to your particular team. And we're really happy to offer a 45-minute, I'll call it a consultation, but really it's a cup of coffee. We can talk to you about your teamwork, how things are going, and how we might be able to just give you some guidance and advice on how to move that forward. It's not a sales opportunity. If it turns into one of those, then that's fine. But actually, we're just offering everybody an opportunity to talk more about their team culture. And hopefully we can spot a habit that you can work on and leave you with some practical guidance that you can take away to your team. So that opportunity is there for anybody that wishes to take it. We've had that for the last 2 sessions, and we have had a couple of people reach out. They've been really valuable conversations that I think people have taken something from. So that's there if you want to use it. And then there's just some final thoughts around hopefully some summaries of what we've picked up on today. Strong teams aren't built by chance. And I think that's a really key point. You do need to work on teamwork. It does come more naturally to some individuals than others, but it's not. It still requires work for a team to work together brilliantly. and you can see that. Sport is always the best example of that, but you can see that across business on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to wrap up there and stop sharing so we can just see if anybody's got any questions as we literally just clock over to the 45-minute point, but hopefully that's been useful, and thanks very much for listening in to your contribution, and I'll see if we've got any questions to answer to wrap up the session.
Katie's got a question in the chat, Craig.
Yeah, go for it. What would your advice be for boosting teamwork within a remote environment which has current lack of engagement? Yeah, actually, the tool that we're about to send out might be a really practical use for that. If you can pull people together on a regularized call that's just about you working together brilliantly as a team, it doesn't need to be long. It can be just 20-minute bite-sized chunks. Look, I went on this call the other day. I found these 5 habits that we can look at. Which one do you think we could do a bit of work around? Commit to action, review it a week later, and just build it into your rhythm and routines. Either build it as a separate, I always think it's better as a separate meeting because it then has its own agenda. But if not, build it into the back end of your sessions. It is more difficult in a remote setting, but we've got Kim on the phone on the call today. We worked with at a previous organisation, and we tried to work hard on teamwork and culture at that organisation with offices as far and wide as South Africa and Australia, and I think we did that to reasonable success. It requires more consistency, I think, in a remote setting. You can't leave things for too long because people just forget and lose that connection.
So I think also to add to that, having worked with remote teams all my life, not necessarily at the end of a screen, but in field sales, I think getting people involved as well. Don't just bring people to a meeting to discuss an agenda that's been put down for you or an agenda that you've set up. Really get people to hold themselves to account for something. So use delegation, Katie, to give people responsibility. So actually, they've really got to be planned and prepped to come to that meeting. They'll be far more engaged, even if they're hyper engaged in their little bit, but they'll appreciate what effort they've had to put into that, which will make them more engaged in what other people bring. But keep those bite-sized chunks really short and chunky so that people aren't sat on a meeting for 35-40 minutes. But yeah, I've worked with lots of remote teams, so if you want to hook up afterwards, then feel free to do so.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
You're welcome. I'm conscious we're over, just running over, so anybody that needs to dip away, feel free to do so, but we're more than happy to stick around for anybody that's got any further questions.
And if there's no further questions, well, after Susan, I'm just going to say we are running another series. We're building another series, and we'd love to know what topics you'd like to know about. Our thoughts at the moment are around conflict, effective feedback and difficult conversations, and 360 feedback. That's what we're thinking. But if you've got other stuff that you just like these kind of 45-minute sessions on, please chuck them in the chat because we'd be happy to accommodate if we get enough interest.
Yeah, I'd really further that. I really would value your feedback because we're definitely having a healthy conflict about what we should be doing next. So if you can help us with that conflict, that would be really helpful. So any ideas you've got, then that would be really useful. I'm particularly interested in whether people think 360 feedback is useful, because I think it's an amazing tool, but I'm aware that not many people have used it. So any thoughts you have, drop us an email.
Thanks, Susan. That's feedback. That's a good one.
Perfect. Right, we're going to let you go. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. If there is, reach out to us directly. Thanks very much for your time today. Have a lovely day. It looks like the sun's coming back out, so enjoy the weather, and hopefully we'll see you on the next session. Take care.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.